The title is not an exaggeration. This collection here really did set me back hundreds of dollars, especially because I decided to try to play Silent Hill during the pandemic. Then again, there are worse ways you could spend money. I will clarify that I did have the foresight to buy Shantae and the Pirate's Curse when it was originally available, and it is one of my favorite search action games, but I don't think it's worth the astronomical asking price on eBay right now. So Silent Hill is a survival horror franchise created by Konami, and it had steady releases for a good while until after the cancellation of Silent Hills, which was when they pretty much ignored it for like a decade until they recently announced a revival. I had originally planned to do this more ambitious video where I talked about my thoughts about the franchise, but those plans kind of fell through as time went on, and I couldn't quite get a script right, so I decided to try a Scott Stash style ramble in honor of the recent revival of the franchise and the release of the remake of Silent Hill 2. First, we have the first 4 games, which were developed by Team Silent. In conversations about Silent Hill, these 4, or at least first 3, are consistently hailed as masterpieces of the survival horror genre, and after playing them for myself for the first time, I would actually kind of agree, although I wouldn't say they were all like, perfect experiences, mostly in terms of how the gameplay is a little clunky in places across all 4. The storytelling, however, is where they really shine for the most part. Silent Hill 1 on the PS1 has one of the more iconic stories. You have Harry Mason, who swerves to avoid something on the road, and when he comes to after crashing his car, he realizes that his daughter is missing, so he ventures into the town of Silent Hill to go searching for her. When I got this, that was actually an interesting story. Again, it was during the pandemic when I was actually looking for these, and there's a local game store that is pretty good at having games from pretty much every system you can think of. Although, naturally, it was difficult to find Silent Hill, so I looked there first, and I asked if they happened to have any Silent Hill games at all, because I didn't see them. So they went into the back and found this. So I was able to actually buy this for cheaper than it would have been on eBay by like half or to a third of the cost. So that was a really lucky find, and I couldn't pass it up. When I say cheaper, I mean basically how much a new copy would have cost back when it originally came out. So that gave me a unique window into what it would have been like to play this new. In any case, I thought the writing was pretty solid. I loved the characters and setting. The PS1 graphics are dated by today's standards, but they actually do help with, in an odd way, with the atmosphere of the town and the monsters that inhabit it. As you go in further, you realize there's a whole cult thing going on with the Order, but that gets kind of messy in later games, but here it's okay, even if it was a little vague. The thing about the gameplay, though, is this was made when tank controls were a thing, and I personally don't like tank controls, even if I can get used to them. So that's why I liked that later games either had the option to not have them or did away with them completely. Even discounting the whole thing with the tank controls, the combat is a little clunky, although later games don't do too much to help with that, if I'm being honest. And the puzzles could be a little tricky even on the lowest setting. I will admit that with some navigation, I ended up using a guide just because at the time I was trying to get through all the games and see all of the endings in a timely fashion, but I did I did still explore a bit. And with the puzzles, I did actually try to solve them on my own, and I felt like a genius when I got to that one constellation themed, animal themed puzzle, and I figured that out on my own, and it was an amazing feeling to figure that out. I'll also admit this is the only one of the games where I didn't go out of my way to play it enough times to see every single ending. I did see a couple, the Good Plus ending and the first of the famous UFO endings. The main reason being I was trying to, since there are so many games, I was trying to do as few playthroughs as possible, and I actually messed up at a critical point with the original Silent Hill and saved at the wrong time. So it would have taken me quite a while to play it enough times to make up for that, especially considering how, again, the controls are clunky, and I decided at least seeing the UFO ending would be enough to make up for that, because you gotta see that. So although I do think this game aged more noticeably than the others in terms of aspects of its gameplay, I do think it is definitely worth playing however you can, especially if you can do it for well under the eBay prices. As far as I'm aware, you can still get it on PSN for like $10, so that's a good route to go. So then we have Silent Hill 2, which is probably the most famous of all the games, considering it's the one that got a remake first. Although I will mention right now that I believe the reason it got a remake and not the first game is because Christoph Gans, who directed the first Silent Hill movie, is making a film adaptation based on Silent Hill 2 called Return to Silent Hill. So I think the idea was they would have the remake on shelves, so that would get people interested in seeing the movie, or people would see the movie and go, I want to play Silent Hill 2. And bam, there's one on the shelf. Getting back to the actual game though, this was actually the first one I played, and that price tag right here is actually what I paid for it, because I found it years ago at this store in Texas during a trip there. The store that has a lot of movies and, well, the important part to me was video games. Now this isn't a perfect copy. I'm pretty sure this isn't the original box, and there might be a stain on here, but you actually see some discoloration right there. But it was a cheap copy, and I have it. I played this for the first time. I very quickly fell in love with it. I liked the psychological aspect of the story, which was James Sunderland goes to the town of Silent Hill in search of his wife Mary, whom he received a letter from, even though she has been dead for 3 years. Along the way, he meets other characters who are in the town for their own reasons, and the game doesn't really shy away from covering a lot of taboo subject matter. I'm not sure how much detail I can go into because of YouTube, but regardless, all the characters are interesting in their own ways, and it's a very well-written struggle for everyone involved. Pretty much all the characters are going through their own struggles, and the game has a very mature handling of its mature themes. I think that's the best way I can put it. I did play this enough to see every ending, and I thought the effort was worth it. Even the more comedic UFO and dog endings. This game also introduced the iconic monster Pyramid Head, who has a very specific symbolic purpose in the story, and I thought I handled it really well. Pyramid Head is an intimidating figure, especially the first time you play through Silent Hill 2, and it's odd that it became a sort of mascot for the series, to the point where even Masahiro Ito, the creature designer, commented negatively about that phenomenon. While it does have a very powerful and well-written story, the gameplay is, again, where it gets clunky. The combat is improved over the original Silent Hill, but it's still not the best. You can set combat and riddle difficulties, so you can actually set the combat difficulty to the lowest and you can pretty much skip it. The puzzles themselves are kind of like a point and click adventure game. You have to think with a certain logic, like, oh, you have to melt a wax doll and combine that with a horseshoe, and then you can create a handle to open a gate. Stuff like that. And the bosses also have really good symbolic meaning, but are kind of easy to deal with, if that makes any sense. I also want to make a note about the voice acting. I know the voices in this game are iconic. While I agree the voices are iconic, the voice acting itself is kind of bad. I understand the idea of like they're normal people, so they just sound, they don't sound like, you know, professional voice actors. But while I did like it the first time I played it, over time I couldn't stop thinking about how stiff the line readings are. I didn't expect them to, you know, have the same quality as modern voice acting, but the line reads just don't have the same effect on like repeat playthroughs. Except for Mary's letter in the Leave ending. That one actually felt emotional the last time I played it for some reason. I still think this is easily one of the best games in the series. And again, I loved it so much, I went out and got everything that I possibly could that was Silent Hill. And I would highly recommend playing this however you can, whether it's the original or remake. Then we have Silent Hill 3, which, if I'm being honest, I think is on par with Silent Hill 2, if not maybe a little better in some places. I really liked the story of Silent Hill 3, especially Heather as the lead. She is a character that I wished more people would talk about when discussing the idea of strong female characters in video games. She feels like a regular teenager, but at the same time is a little tomboyish without going overboard. She's a good mixture of being a teenage girl, but also, again, the tomboyish traits. And she is vulnerable, but she can still take care of herself. She's never a damsel in distress. And she has a very natural reaction to all the horrific things that are going on around her. And her significance in the story gets clearer as it goes on, and I really liked the style of writing that they went with for her story. I also really liked the concept that the other world didn't have to be specifically in the town itself, because we actually see what another world looks like in a mall or in a subway, and those were very interesting concepts to explore here. Plus, you have characters like Douglas and Vincent, who are all memorable and unique in their own ways. Vincent is especially a very quotable character, and there's also this woman named Claudia who's following Heather, and the significance of that again gets revealed as the game goes on. It's a very engaging psychological story, and I really loved it for that. It also has certain iconic moments that rival Silent Hill 2. Like one of my favorites is you're going in this building and you hear the squeak of a wheelchair wheel, and you follow a trail to it, and as you approach it, the wheel slowly stops. And that's a really great atmospheric touch that takes advantage of it being a horror game without coming off like it's trying too hard. Now, there is a point in the story where you visit a hospital that's significant to Heather's backstory, and while it does use the hospital from Silent Hill 2, likely to save on development costs, based on what happens in the story, I think narratively it might have made more sense if it was the hospital from the original Silent Hill, but the way they used it here still works fine. There's also actually some better voice acting in this game, which I appreciated, and there's also improvements to combat. The puzzles can still be a little iffy, but they're actually not too bad to solve, especially compared to Silent Hill 1. By the same token, the bosses are also like fine for what they are. Now, one thing I did end up appreciating on repeat playthroughs of Silent Hill 3 is although there are some, I don't know how to put it, lengthy requirements to get certain things, I did like it was a little more willing to be silly. For example, there's an attack that you can unlock called the Heather Beam that allows Heather to attack enemies from a distance, and I did go out of my way to defeat that absurdly high number of monsters just to unlock it, because that was important for the UFO ending. There's also, among the many costumes, the ability to give Heather a magical girl transformation that upgrades the Heather Beam into the Sexy Beam for increased damage output, which is just, you have to view it on a later playthrough, but it's pretty funny that they were willing to put that in there, and I respect the fact that something so deeply psychological isn't afraid to try something like that. Now, I won't lie, this game is not cheap, especially because the physical PS2 copy is the only one available. There isn't a digital copy like Silent Hill 1 or a cheaper Xbox copy like Silent Hill 2 or Silent Hill 4. You have to get the physical PS2 copy if you want to play it on physical hardware. Because of that, I ended up paying, let's just say, almost peak COVID prices for this. If it helps illustrate, it was also a copy that contained the soundtrack, because I wanted to make sure I definitely had that for the full experience. I do think this is worth playing whatever way you can, but I'm really not sure if it's worth spending potentially hundreds of dollars on a copy. I didn't spend hundreds, but I did definitely end up spending 3 digits, which is probably more than you should spend on a video game. Again, can't make a worse choice. Then again, I haven't really felt any buyer's remorse yet over this, so you do you, I guess. Now, before I get into Silent Hill 4, I would like to make a quick detour to talk about this. As you can tell, this is the Silent Hill HD collection, which collects Silent Hill 2 and 3 in one cheap package. Instead of paying potentially hundreds of dollars now for these two, you can get them both for about $30 even now. Now, that is a great deal, and you do get to play these two games without essentially giving up your firstborn child. However, there are a couple caveats that you really need to know. The first is that this uses unfinished builds of the games, so they're not going to be the ideal experience. It got better after they patched it, but you're still going to see some oddities, including graphical oddities that you wouldn't normally find in the other two games. They also changed the voice acting, notably. Like I said with Silent Hill 2, the voice actor for James managed to get it, so the original voices were patched into this, but the voices here could not make it into the HD version. So you're not getting the full-on original Silent Hill 2 and 3 experience, but I wouldn't say this is completely unplayable. The voice acting is actually better performed in Silent Hill 2, although the real question is whether you think the voices match the character, which is a whole debate in of itself that I don't want to get into here. And with Silent Hill 3, I thought it was interesting that the new voice actors, at least to me, actually sounded fairly close to the originals in terms of voice and performance. I may be mistaken there because it's been, at least a couple of years since I played this, but I didn't think it was too bad. So if you just want a cheap alternative to the original physical Silent Hill 2 and 3, I wouldn't say this is the worst purchase you could make, because again, it does at least give you the experience of playing them, even if it isn't completely ideal. But I will give the other caveat, which is you should get the PS3 version, because between the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions, this is the only one that actually got a patch, so you will have at least a better time here than the people who played it at launch or on the 360. Plus, again, you can get it for $30 sealed even now, so I'm not going to stop you if that's the choice you want to make. That brings us to Silent Hill 4: The Room. Now, contrary to popular belief, Silent Hill 4 was always meant to be a Silent Hill game. They just didn't decide until pretty early in its development, maybe like 5 or 10%, whether it would be a main numbered entry or if it would be a spin-off. The entire point behind Silent Hill 4 was that it's unique compared to the first three, and I think that really shows. I personally actually kind of liked this one, even if it's doesn't hit the same highs as like Silent Hill 2 or 3. So this one is about Henry Townsend. He ends up trapped in his apartment. The only escape is through this mysterious portal that appears in one of the rooms, but he ends up in an alternate reality and repeatedly has to go back between this alternate world and the apartment. He goes through multiple environments and gets wrapped up in this mystery involving a serial killer named Walter Sullivan, who was actually first mentioned in Silent Hill 2 in a note, or newspaper article actually, but I don't think they had this in mind when they came up with that. So the fact that Henry just really wants to leave his locked apartment is kind of relatable in a sense. I also liked how he goes from being a solo explorer to also being a protector, because in the second half of the game he also has to protect his next door neighbor Eileen, who ends up getting wrapped up in this whole thing. And he also meets other interesting characters, although what's interesting with them is how they go from being supporting characters to being active threats in the second half of the game. Where it's really different is its gameplay. It has some traditional Silent Hill elements, but they are approached in a different way. The combat, again, is okay. From what I remember, the puzzles weren't too difficult, especially once you're familiar with how the game works. The puzzles are more about how you approach the environment, and you actually have to make certain decisions, like unlocking a specific door in the first half that will make going back through the second time a lot easier. You also actually have to eventually deal with hauntings in your apartment. What makes the hauntings effective is that when you're outside the apartment, it's that traditional third-person Silent Hill view, but when you're in the apartment, it's first person. So you are witnessing the hauntings firsthand through Henry's eyes, and that's a unique perspective because it's also like you are dealing with them personally yourself. In the first half of the game, the apartment is a beneficial, safe place where you can rest, refill your health, switch out items, and explore and see any changes that have been made. But in the second half, the apartment is actively hostile. You actually take damage the longer you're in there, and you have to deal with those hauntings. So you can collect items throughout the game to help you deal with those hauntings. So when you're in the apartment during the second half, your goal is to get in and out as quickly as possible and just do whatever bare minimum you can to switch out items as needed and get out. I think that's a unique and interesting gameplay loop that provides great experience, especially if you're playing it for the first time. And I liked how you had to be careful with item management here, especially because you can only hold a certain number. So on repeat playthroughs, and especially if you're doing a speed run, it's good to know the bare minimum items that you can get away with just to get through the game as fast as you can, which is actually pretty fun to do once you are aware of the optimal strategy. If I had any criticisms, though, it would be that the monster designs aren't quite as creative or symbolically interesting as the first 3 games, and there's some out of place sound effects, like there's a monster that belches whenever it takes damage, so that's unintentionally silly as opposed to some of the intentionally silly antics you can find in Silent Hill 3. There's also the fact that you have to protect Eileen for the second half of the game, like pretty much the entire second half. The ending you get actually relies a bit on how well you protect her. You're more likely to get a good ending if you put in the effort to protect her. Personally, despite how long the escort mission, if you will, lasts, I didn't think protecting Eileen was too bad because you just have to put in a little bit of effort to protect her. You don't have to like stash her away in another room unless you just really want to be kind of lazy about it. So I personally would recommend Silent Hill 4. This one is actually easier to access. You can get it on GOG for a fairly reasonable price. It's based on the PC port, so you might have to mod it if you really want the full experience. If you want the console experience, I would tell you to do it I did and get the Xbox copy because it's cheaper, because for some reason Xbox copies of older titles are cheaper. I will mention with this specific copy, just like my copy of Silent Hill 2, it's imperfect. It doesn't look imperfect, but I don't think this is the original box, because you can see this in the right light, you can see this Flexbox logo, and the case isn't quite the same as a standard Xbox case, but I didn't care that much because I got a copy and it has everything else original, so that's what mattered more to me. Now we have the post-Team Silent games. After the release of Silent Hill 4, Konami ended up disbanding Team Silent, so they continued the franchise by outsourcing the series to other developers. Now, these 4 aren't nearly as beloved as the original 4, but I played them anyway because I wanted to have the full Silent Hill experience and see for myself whether or not they were any good. First, we have Silent Hill Origins, developed by Climax LA for the PSP. Now, this has a PS2 release, but I went with the PSP version because the game was originally built around that, so I decided I might as well have the intended experience. The game also recommends playing it in the dark with headphones, which may sound a little silly for some, but on at least one of my playthroughs I actually tried that and I actually found it a fairly immersive experience. As for the game itself, it bills itself as a prequel to the original Silent Hill and follows a new protagonist, Travis Grady, a trucker who finds himself in the town of Silent Hill after stopping to avoid an accident, and he ends up saving a girl's life. He also has a mysterious past tied to the town, and as the game goes on, we learn more about his story as well as some of the events that led up to the original Silent Hill. The story itself is fine. Travis himself is a okay protagonist. He wasn't really my favorite of all of them, but at least there is some depth to his character, and it was interesting to see an attempt at setting up the circumstances behind the original Silent Hill, even if it isn't completely satisfying in places. There is also a creature named the Butcher, which is basically I'll just say Pyramid Head ripoff, because, you know, Pyramid Head was so popular in Silent Hill 2 that they had to have their own version. The Butcher, which is a key character for Travis, isn't nearly as satisfying of a symbolic image as Pyramid Head. That's not the biggest issue with the story. It's just something that I wasn't a huge fan of. I did like that the game was designed around the PSP, including its portable nature, so that influences where save points are and how easy it is to get around, including basically the size of the town. I did find some of the puzzles interesting. However, my biggest issue with the gameplay itself is that they stuck a little too closely to the original Silent Hill, including having its own form of jank. I remember the item system wasn't the best, and the combat system was clunky, but the biggest issue is that the camera isn't done quite as well as even the original Silent Hill. There was actually a moment where, because of how the camera is done, I ended up looping back and forth between the gate of a cemetery, I think it was. I'm not saying the game is bad. It's actually quite good for a PSP title. I just don't love it nearly as much as some other people seem to. Regardless, it was interesting to at least see what a portable Silent Hill could be and how a smaller screen doesn't necessarily diminish the heart. Now, the next game, Silent Hill Homecoming, on the other hand, is total garbage. Now, that is a harsh way of putting it, but it really is like the worst of the post-Team Silent Hill games, mainly because it's mostly just a really great idea, but poorly executed. The main character is Alex Shepard, who returns home from military duty and finds that his brother is missing. So he goes out into the town of Silent Hill and tries to look for him while encountering the horrors that have befallen the town. I really liked the idea behind Homecoming because, considering what Team Silent did with James Sunderland and Silent Hill 2, imagine what sort of horrors a war veteran would be able to witness in a town as twisted as Silent Hill. Unfortunately, it doesn't go in any direction you'd expect from that premise. The execution of the story is a bit sloppy because, if I remember correctly, there's like 5 different endings, but they are all so different and rely on such a different interpretation of the events that the story is written in a loose way that can easily justify any of those endings. So as you're playing the game, you have a harder time of trying to make everything work cohesively. When it does end, the dots you connect based on that ending really only apply to that ending. I did notice the more I played it, to get all the endings, that the bosses are symbolic to the central conflict with Alex and his brother, which was actually a nice touch. Notably, Homecoming features a direct copy of Pyramid Head, but they called it the Bogeyman. I did research on this game while playing it. I learned that Tom Hewlett, producer who sort of took over the franchise for a bit, didn't like that Pyramid Head was going to be in there because he thought it was lazy, and they thought that the people at Double Helix should be more creative, but they just ignored him and put Pyramid Head in there anyway. Oddly, Silent Hill Homecoming also borrows elements from the movies, as though it was created to attract people who were introduced to the franchise through the movies as opposed to the Team Silent games. That's fine and all, I understand, but it creates some conflicts with what was previously established, as much as it tries to still fit within the original Team Silent games. I think they could have been more consistent, at least for the sake of longtime fans. But I guess if Homecoming was your first Silent Hill, you might not have cared as much, which is fine. From what I remember of the game design, it does capture the feeling of the town fairly well. The monsters had more creative designs than like Silent Hill 4, for instance, and they had some interesting ways that you had to take them down, but the combat was like okay. I like how they tried to modernize it for the time, but was, I guess some might say it's a little floaty. I didn't notice it while I was playing it, but I can totally understand that viewpoint. The over-the-shoulder camera did help with modernizing the game and working with that specific style of combat. I don't really remember many of the puzzles actually, but it does actually do one thing that I really don't like about prior Silent Hill games. This does it way worse. It's that the games, for whatever reason, are perfectly content with letting you leave a room without gathering a key item, including a literal key that you need to advance the story at some point. Like, they leave you put you right next to the item instead of just giving you the item. But with this, I think it was towards the end of the game, there's like a building you're in and you have to go down this hallway and you need a specific key to progress. Well, after the cutscene, you are not given that key. You actually have to go back to the previous room to get the key. I had to look up that you had to do that, which was really annoying. But I can imagine people who weren't doing that floundering around for like several minutes trying to find this key or wonder if they missed it somewhere. And I think that's kind of bad design, especially because as bad as it was with the other games, at least they left you in the same room as the key. Here you actually have to walk all the way back to get a key. I'm aware there are also some technical issues with Silent Hill Homecoming. I'm not sure how many of them I encountered myself, but I'm aware that the Steam version is particularly bad about it. So even though that's more readily available, don't, I guess. Now, the thing about the console version of Silent Hill Homecoming is that if you're just looking to play a Silent Hill game, this is by far the easiest one to find, and also among the cheapest. I think I might have gotten this copy for like $20, and that was because at the time, and I was looking for the games, I was just happy to find the 360 copy. So that's why I played the 360 copy. I actually played it on the Xbox One because I didn't want the 360 scratching the disc, because to me, for a Silent Hill game, scratched disc is like, fate worse than death for some of the harder to find games. Now, although I agree that this is easily the worst of the post-Team Silent games for sure, I did end up later buying the PS3 copy so that if I wanted to play it again, I could easily play a copy that won't scratch itself. So there are better options for Silent Hill games, but if you don't really care which one you play, this one's fine because it's easier only for that reason. But I would probably suggest this one, but if you're worried about expense, go for this one. Now, from the same people who brought you Silent Hill Origins, we have Silent Hill Shattered Memories for the Wii. Now, between Silent Hill Origins and Shattered Memories, you can tell that Climax LA, who became Climax for this release, really loved the original Silent Hill, because Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a remake of the original game, or rather a reimagining, where it takes similar plot elements, but does it in a very unique way. Maybe that's the real reason they skipped to Silent Hill 2. Jokes aside, I actually really liked what they did with Shattered Memories. Everything is built around the Wii, which is the main reason I went for the Wii copy, which is actually cheaper than the PS2 or even PSP copies. The idea behind this game, as indicated by a admittedly silly, out of context splash screen at the beginning, is that as you play this, it creates a psych profile based on specific choices that you make, including ones you may not expect, as well as the occasional cut into a therapy session where the answers that you give there also have an impact on exactly what you see in the game. You'll go to a number of the same locations across Silent Hill while Harry searches for his daughter, but what exactly you do is dependent on previous choices, and I actually really like that they were ambitious enough to not only implement that, but succeed at implementing that. It even influences the appearances and personalities of key characters, and I find myself wondering why I don't see other developers attempt the same thing, even outside of the context of Silent Hill or survival horror in general. The gameplay is also pretty immersive on the Wii. Not only do you use the Wiimote to help you look around the environment, but they also have some audio come out of the controller speaker. There's also notably a lack of combat. Instead, there's more of an emphasis on environmental exploration and puzzles, and I thought they struck a really good balance there, and the lack of combat helps take the edge off of, having to manage resources like health items or ammo or weapons, and just focus strictly on the whole mystery aspect and dealing with the therapy sessions while you build your psych profile. The psych profile that you build up also determines the ending, which I really liked. What I found interesting is I played this only twice, just because of the nature of how the ending system works. The first time I played completely naturally without a guide, and I got what would be considered the best ending. I am not sure what it says about me that I got that just from my natural play style, but I still found it interesting that, like Silent Hill 2, your play style and your own personality can affect the ending. The second time I played the game, I intentionally played a specific way by following a guide. When you follow a guide, the psych profile system can feel a little too mathematical, so I would recommend, if you are going to play this, play it completely blind the first time, just to see how well whatever happens matches the kind of actions you would take, or how well the psych profile that it reads off to you at the end matches your own personality. Even if it's inaccurate, it might still give you something to think about. I will mention that although there is a lack of combat, there are chase sequences instead, where Harry runs away from monsters while trying to navigate a space and find the exit. The chases I thought were okay, and the appearance of the monsters that chase you actually are also affected by your psych profile, but I found the layouts occasionally a little too hard to navigate. It's like a maze, which I know is what they were going for, but sometimes it was a little too easy to get lost, so I ended up having to look at a map once or twice to figure out where I was going. Otherwise, this is actually a pretty good game. Also mentioned, I really like the ice theme of the game. Instead of dealing with the fog, Harry has to deal with the cold, and the appearance of monsters, and thus a chase sequence, is indicated by the town freezing over, so that creates a new type of tension and horror, and I would like to see someone try other elements with survival horror like this. And finally, we have Silent Hill Downpour. I loved this so much that I got it signed. The thing about Downpour is, on the surface, it kind of has a lot going against it. Apart from being the last Silent Hill for like a decade, it was made by Vatra, who is a lesser known, I want to say Russian or Czech studio, I forget which one. They hadn't really done anything like this before. This was the only Silent Hill game to not have Akira Yamaoka doing the music. Instead, it was Daniel Leaked, who was a film composer, and it also has a Korn song, I think it's called Silent Hill, that plays during the end credits, and also in the main menu if you wait long enough for the demo mode to kick in. Plus, when it launched, it had a lot of technical issues, so it doesn't help that when you try to find discussion about Downpour, you'll mostly see people talking about it in its pre-patch state. Now, of course, even with the patch, Downpour does still have issues. You can't skip cutscenes. The game is over in 4 to 5 hours, depending on what you do, and if you skip all side quests. There's no manual save system, so you have to rely on the autosave system, which only has the last 5 autosaves, so if you go too far ahead, you can't go back. And the combat can be kind of especially with the annoyance that if you just stay in one spot for too long, even if you're in the middle of an environmental puzzle, a monster will just spawn, forcing you to fight it. On top of that, on one of my 3 playthroughs of this, the game actually crashed on me multiple times, but I don't know if that was because I was playing it through the Xbox One at the time, or if the game was just like that. But either way, that was kind of annoying. Apart from those issues though, the more I played this, the more I fell in love with it. And I could tell that the developers actually had a lot of love for Silent Hill. And this is the closest that a non-Team Silent studio has come to replicating the experience of a Team Silent game. They really understood the atmosphere and the symbolic, psychological nature of the town itself, and it's also oozing with Easter eggs for those who want to find them. So you can tell that there was a lot of love put into this. You can actually even find the room from Silent Hill 4, which is really cool. The clear passion for this also comes through in the story, which not only has a unique protagonist, but also actually follows through on what you would expect from that sort of idea. In this case, it's about Murphy Pendleton, who is a convicted criminal, and while he's being transferred to another facility, the bus crashes, leaving only him and Anne Cunningham alive. And as he goes through the town, he's not only confronted with the tragic past that ties him and Anne together, but also learns the true nature of his crime. So the player learns it at the same time. He also occasionally encounters a creature called the Boogeyman, and while that is a silly name, and some might view it as another Pyramid Head knockoff, it actually has a much deeper symbolic meaning than either the Butcher or the Bogeyman. So I was able to forgive that, and it had a great place in the story. I just really like Murphy as a character, and I like how the game explored him and his relationship with Anne. Plus, I like his interactions with some of the unique, mysterious characters of Silent Hill that he comes across, like a mysterious mailman who seems to have the right advice for pointing him in the right direction. There's also the DJ at the radio station who is really desperate to get out of the town and tries to subtly communicate with Murphy through the radio. Plus, the game understood symbolism really well. A wheelchair is actually important to the story, and you occasionally see wheelchairs as you're going through the town. And as we learn more about what happened to make Anne despise Murphy in the past, it feels more tragic, and his other world takes on new meanings. The exact nature of what Murphy did might depend on the ending, which could sour the experience for some, but to me, I was actually kind of rooting for him to make it out of his nightmare. So when I achieved one of the good endings, that felt like the natural conclusion of the story to me. Murphy and Anne do cross paths multiple times throughout the game, even though they went on their own separate paths. And I thought that these interactions remain consistent with their characters, which helps create a more focused storyline compared to something like Silent Hill Homecoming. Something I wanted to point out that I noticed on second playthrough is there's actually one interaction between them that mirrors an interaction between Heather and Douglas in Silent Hill 3. I thought it was neat that they not only called back to what I would consider a great moment, but the fact that they made the interactions similar yet distinct shows that the team behind Downpour really had reverence for the Team Silent games, but were still able to execute it in a different way that felt fitting for the new story. Now, Silent Hill Downpour was originally going to be a co-op game, which is why Murphy and Anne go off in different directions. Each player would have controlled a different character, and they would have crossed paths at different points, and they would have seen different things. That was actually a bit too ambitious at the time for Konami, so that's why it was just Murphy's story in the game, which is how we got Anne's story. This comic was written by Tom Waltz, who co-wrote Downpour. Anne's story was originally going to be presented as DLC for Downpour, but those plans fell through, So Tom Waltz was able to get the story from Anne's perspective produced at IDW so it could see the light of day in comic form. Now, I really liked Anne's story. It's a really cool way to make sure that certain concepts don't go to waste. The artwork is actually pretty good. It's done by Tristan T-Rex Jones, and he did a good job at capturing the look of Downpour and also the feeling of being in Silent Hill. Now, there are times where the artwork can be a little too dark, so it's a little hard to follow certain transitions. So if you want more out of Downpour, I would recommend reading Anne's story, especially if you can find it at a good price. I was really lucky when I got this that it was pretty close to MSRP on an eBay listing. When I was actively looking for this, I did happen to see that the trade and even individual issues were getting harder to find, so good luck. I mean that in a supportive way. Now, I would like to mention something about how I got these copies. As you can see, this copy of Downpour, which is the one I played, is kind of beat up, but at least the disc still worked. The main reason I ended up getting it that way is because when I was actively searching for Downpour, which I think at the time was one of the few things I was still missing from my own Silent Hill experience, was it happened to be at a particular window of time where the PS3 version was literally impossible to find. There were no eBay listings, and 2 local game stores that I went to, neither of them had it, and I couldn't find it at other stores I could think of, so I resorted to getting this beat up 360 copy just so I could actually play it. Yeah, if you can find either of these at a great price, I say go for it. Now, the last of the post-team Silent games, there's no physical representation because it's PT, which was a playable teaser for Silent Hills, which would have been directed by Hideo Kojima and starred Norman Reedus. Also would have had involvement from Guillermo del Toro, and the monster designer would have been Junji Ito. I actually still have PT from when it launched, and at this point my PS4 is a PT machine because that's the only way to preserve that apart from really faithful fan remakes. PT is incredible, and it still is no matter how many times I played it. That was actually my first taste of Silent Hill, if you will. Kind of glad it was that one. When I replayed it in the context of the rest of the series, certain decisions actually made a lot more sense. It felt really inspired by Silent Hill 4, but taken in a new direction, which I appreciated, and it really understood Silent Hill, and I can only wonder what could have been. I hope that one day PT can get properly emulated, because that's the only way you're going to be able to play it apart from spending God knows how much trying to get a PS4 that still has it on it. I do also remember day one with the PS5. It's a really cool piece of Silent Hill history to own in some capacity, but I feel bad for those who are unable to play it, especially because PT was also very inspirational for a lot of other games, including the existence of the Dread X collections, whose entire purpose is to let developers have their own PT in a sense. I have one last thing to talk about with the pre-revival Silent Hill content, and that's the movies. I'm going to make this a little quick. This first movie was directed by Christoph Gans. I hope I said his name right. He is a big fan of the Silent Hill series, and you can actually tell from how well the movie captures the atmosphere and look of the town and all of the creatures. The practical effects are still stunning and bring the creatures to life in ways that only a physical actor could reliably do, and everything just looks and feels incredible. The story is just okay. It's not the worst, but it could have been better. It's kind of brought down a little by having one too many plot threads, because you have to balance the real world, the fog world, and the other world. It can feel like it slows down the movie at times, but on a second viewing, I didn't mind it as much, so I guess that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is Pyramid Head is in here, even though he kind of shouldn't be, because he has a very specific symbolic purpose to Silent Hill 2. Just kind of solidifies him as a mascot for the series. The movie also changed specific aspects of the setting. They changed the snow from the first game to ash in this game, which creates an interesting atmosphere for a movie, but can throw off people who go from the film to the game. Years later, there was a second movie, Silent Hill Revelation, or Silent Hill 3D, which was based on Silent Hill 3. I don't have Revelation, at least at the time of this recording. At first, I didn't want a copy because of what I'm about to say, but I do still want a copy now, just to at least complete my collection. So I'll just use Silent Hill 3 here to represent the movie. Revelation is total garbage. I'm sure the director was a fan of the games on some level, but it was clear to me that Revelation completely misunderstood Silent Hill 3. Not just the fact that they made the horror a lot more generic instead of like psychological. It changes the ending of Silent Hill just to the movie, just to mold it into the plot of Silent Hill 3, but it ends up confusing things. Also kind of gives away a major twist from Silent Hill 3 a little too early. But the biggest change for the characters that really didn't work was Heather goes from this strong female lead in Silent Hill 3 to total damsel in distress. The director, I believe, thought that would make her more realistic, but I think that made Heather less interesting, because she's mostly in fear of everything happening around her, instead of she is afraid of what's happening, but she can still push through and deal with it in the end and grow more confident in herself. One of the biggest things that I didn't like was Lakeside Amusement Park, which is important to Silent Hill 3, isn't even by the lakeside. So what's the point of still calling it Lakeside Amusement Park? The Lakeside Amusement Park scene in Revelation does still try to recreate a great scene from Silent Hill 3 on a merry-go-round, but it doesn't have the same impact as it does in the game. Plus, the movie also brings back Pyramid Head as more of a protector role, but again, that doesn't really fit Pyramid Head's original intention. So I wouldn't really recommend Revelation if you're a fan of Silent Hill 3, because you will be disappointed. But I suppose you could find some entertainment value in it if you either want to laugh at how bad a horror movie can be, or you don't mind seeing gore and like just things being thrown at the screen to justify calling it 3D. So those are my thoughts on the Silent Hill series. Even though it's gone through several ups and downs over the years, I still really love this series, and I like the fact that Konami has actually resurrected it for another shot at coming back into the mainstream. I hope it's successful enough that Silent Hill fans can actually have more content. I'm looking forward to playing and watching whatever comes out, just to show my support for this incredible series. I also hope that increased interest in this series will mean that Konami makes these games easier to access on modern systems, including PC, just so fans don't have to spend potentially a lot of money on owning these physically, or resorting to imperfect emulation just to try to get an idea of what these were like. That would be the best thing that could happen for fans both old and new. But hey, at least it's easier than being a Shantae fan.